Hello, this is Teresa from Whimsical Card Studio. Welcome back for part 2 of my split background technique video featuring stamps from Crackerbox and Suzy. If you watched video number 1 already, you will have seen how I did this technique with some layered stamps. Today I'm trying out the same technique but using outline stamps. I chose all floral stamps in this case just to make it easier to show differentiations that you can achieve using the same technique and the same type of stamp. So I'm using this stamp is one that I personally designed for Crackerbox and Suzy. So if you're interested in this stamp or any of the other ones, I will have links to all the products used in this video below. Also, you will want to pay attention to the audio because at some point I'm going to give you keyword number 2 for the MISTI giveaway. If you're not sure what the MISTI giveaway is all about, then you should go back and look at the first video, and the link to that will be in the description as well. So I'm following the same technique that I did before, where I stamp the background, I split the panel up, and then I use ink blending to spread the same color over one portion of the background. And again, I'm using Catherine Pooler inks for this technique because they worked so well the first time, and I decided to just keep going with these inks for this this part 2 video. So you'll see I'm putting together very similar cards. One of the differences between what I did with layered stamping versus outline is in some cases I decided to go ahead and color the images. And you can see this is what it looks like after I used Copic markers to color in those images. And I did not spend a whole lot of time at all, so I actually did not include the coloring part of the video. This just shows you what the difference is if you go ahead and decide to color in the images on the panel. And like the card from the first video, I'm just using a black strip of cardstock for my sentiment on this card. So pretty nice and simple. I will also add some embellishment, and I'm going to use some clear Nouveau drops on this particular card. Something I would note about using the clear drops is after they dried on this card, I noticed on the bottom part that they kind of took on an interesting hue. I expected them to look more like the exact color in the background, but they did not quite look like that. So, you know, when I saw it all dried, I thought I wouldn't do this again, at least on the bottom part of the panel, as far as the clear drops, but, you know, there's something that you can learn from me, from my experience. So now moving on to the second card I created with a different floral stamp. This one is designed by one of my teammates. Her name is Alicia Karkova. She draws a lot of the illustrations for Crackerbox and Suzy, so this is an example of one of her designs. But after stamping the floral all over the background in a Catherine Pooler ink called, I think it's, I don't know, Tiki Torch, I believe is, or Tutti Frutti, I've forgotten, but I will have the description on my blog as well as below the video if you want to see the exact colors. What I do throughout, Tiki Torch, there it is. Anyway, I use the same ink for both the stamping and the ink blending, so I'm not changing out those colors. And at first, it looks like what I'm ink blending is going to totally cover up what I did on the stamping, but after it dries, it actually allows the stamping that you did first to show through, so it's a really kind of cool effect. You saw that I stamped another one of those images separately. I colored it with Copic markers and then cut it out using a Brother Scan and Cut machine. And so now I'm going to stamp on the sentiment, which I'm using the MISTI to do. And because this is a rubber stamp, I removed the insert in the MISTI to allow for the thickness of this type of stamp. And I will add some clear embossing powder on that, even though I did not film it. I decided to pop up each one of the panels to give it more interest. And so I'm using craft foam that has an adhesive on one side, and as you can see by the way I'm putting it down, I'm just partially peeling back one part. I fold it back on itself and then press down on the side where I haven't exposed the adhesive yet, and then just pull away the adhesive to get a perfect application. So this helps from making an oops whenever you're adding foam to the back of a card panel or pieces of a card panel like I'm doing here. And it does mean you have to add some adhesive on the other side, but you know, I don't think that's a big deal. I just use my liquid adhesive, put some on back of each one of those panels, and then I will have a completed card after popping up the flower, which is the last part I do before adding some embellishment with some sequins. So if you're following this series, you know that I'm doing a MISTI giveaway. Details about that giveaway can be found on my blog post, which will be linked below. So here is the keyword for this video: perfection. Again, the keyword for this video is perfection. You'll want to write that down and keep track of that along with the keyword I gave in the first video. If you have not seen that video, I'll have in the suggested videos link, I will be showing you where to see that if you have not seen it yet, and therefore you can get in on this before the contest ends, which will be later in July. I don't know the exact date at this point, but I plan to wrap this up with the third video, most likely before the 15th of July. So make sure you're subscribed and have tapped on the bell icon so that you'll receive notifications every time a new video is released. Okay, back to the card. I'm adding my sequins, and I'm using a tool that I really like for applying sequins. It's the little jewel picker tool, and I'm using some Ranger Multi-Matte Adhesive Medium to attach my sequins with. And sometimes I can't seem to find the right place to show you the card when I finish it. Anyway, moving on to the third and final card for this video. This is another set. I believe it's Morning Glories, I think is the name of this set. There's actually 5 stamps in this set. For some reason, I could only find 3 out of the 5. I mean, as it turns out, it worked just fine in this case. There is an additional flower stamp and leaf stamp in that set. So now that I've stamped the background, what I want to do is I want a circle in the middle, but I also want a space in between the background and the center of the card. Now to add some simple color to the background, I'm using a water brush from Rain. I'll put the link to the item below, but I'm using a water brush, and I'm not using watercolor paper, so I don't want to get a lot of water on the paper, so I'm just using the water brush to pull out color from the lines where I've already stamped. And the reason that this works is because I was using a dye ink, and even after it's dry, it can be activated with water. So what this allows me to do is just to add just a slight hint of color. So this is very low-key coloring. If you're not into coloring or you're in a big hurry, this is a great way to at least get not so flat appearance. So another step that I decided to take on this is I'm using an Arteza watercolor pencil. So after checking the color of the pencil that I wanted to use to see if it was going to work with what I already had, I'm just using the pencil to draw over some of the already stamped lines on each of the flowers. The goal is not to spend a ton of time shading and coloring and all that. It's just to give it a little more dimension so it doesn't look totally flat when you're looking at it. And so just these two little things added enough interest to make it look like more time is spent on it. So again, up to you. You could leave it just stamped and not add anything else, or you can take the extra few minutes to do these two steps and bring a little more life to the panel itself. And similar to my last video, I'm using a pattern paper for the background for this card, just to add a little more interest. You could also skip this step if you prefer a more clean and simple version of this card. My plan at first was to put a white background where that die cut opening is, because I didn't like the way that my ink blended center die cut circle was looking against this pattern paper. So this is where I was headed as I was filming this video. In the end, I ended up changing my mind about how I put this together, and I kind of like the way that that turned out better than where I was going at first. So this is the part where I was adding that piece of scrap white cardstock behind there, just to make it a clean or blank white canvas behind that floral panel, and that way I would have the contrast of that ink blended die cut circle in the middle. I totally could have skipped this because of the way that I ended up putting this together, but it's probably not a bad idea that I did this, because if you look kind of under the edges in the center of the card, it kind of, I think, looks better if you're just seeing white around that instead of possibly seeing the background showing through. So as you can see above, I've added some double-sided foam tape to the background, or the background floral panel. And I'm going to also pop up that center panel, so I don't adhere the background panel immediately, because I felt like I was going to need it to get the spacing right whenever I glue down the center die cut. I hope that makes sense. Right now I am adding the sentiment to that circle, which I will be heat embossing after adding some white embossing powder. And then I'll show you how I use the panel above in order to line up this center part. So now that we're here, you see this little die cut ring that I have? I was planning to just use it for spacing where I needed to put the little pink center die cut. But what I ended up finding out is it looked kind of cool as an additional contrast. That'll make more sense in a moment when you see me add that part back in. But for now, at least, my spacing is good for setting that down, and forgive me for getting my head right into the middle of that, but I really needed to be able to see it to line it up properly. Well, I decided after looking at this that it might really look cool as kind of an inlay look. So rather than popping that up, I figured out how to line it up with the stamping so it looked like a continuous pattern, or at least mostly looked like one. And I'll glue down that little die cut ring around the center part. So just use some liquid adhesive to make sure that I have some time to play with that as far as placement before it gets stuck in place permanently. So as you can see, I'm fiddling with that, just trying to get it just right. And now I get to finally add the front panel to the card, and you'll see what I mean by how it looks to have that popped up and then the inlay, and that wasn't even part of the plan. So, and because also I didn't color that part of it, it also makes it a little bit distinct in that manner. It may be kind of hard to see this on camera, especially with my head right there in the way, but there's what it looks like when I'm finished. And I added some clear sparkling sequins. So here's a close-up look again at all three of the cards. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I would appreciate it if you'd give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again.